One of the things about credibility is you can lose it on every stage of a sales call. If your perceived image is higher than what happens when you show up, you're losing credibility. When your branding tells a certain story, right? I think that's what he talked about. We're talking about the image and the story that your branding tells. Now what happens when your salesperson or yourself, you show up and you're not what that customer was expecting to see? It's inconsistent. You drop a little bit. Now, you have a chance to recover that, obviously. If you're great at talking, great at selling, you can recover that. But we want to try and get to a point where we're being efficient about the way that we do our sales call, to where we're not losing credibility throughout the stage. We always want to be maintaining or gaining, preferably, so that by the end it's easier to close the sale, it's easier to accept payment, all these things. It's easier to get follow-up and easier to get referrals. So derived credibility, a lot of this as you're talking to someone has to do with what's known as kinesics or body language. How do you hold yourself? Does anyone ever look in a mirror to see how you actually look? A lot of us think we know how we look to other people, but unless you've actually practiced it, most people, it's a surprise to them. Have you ever watched yourself on TV and been like, oh man, that's how I was standing? Or, man, I had my hands in my pockets the whole time, I didn't even realize it. I had a fellow I was training, and I took him to some business meetings where he was going to be giving a presentation, and he's comfortable talking to customers, he knows his stuff, but he wasn't super comfortable talking to a larger group of people, and I said, just go for it. He wanted to go for it, so we tried it. And at the end I told him, well, did you notice what you did? He's like, no, I think it went well. And I told him, I said, this is what you're doing the whole time. Hi, my name is Joe. I have a pressure washing business. We have a lot of different services for lots of different people. We offer a full suite of services, including roof washing. He went through all the services, right? But what does this tell you? Nervous?
No confidence.
No confidence, even though he knew what he was talking about. It's subtle things like this. How you carry yourself is extremely important. Little things like this, we'll talk about. What does this tell you? Standoffish. All these little things may seem small, but they add up, because the customer, whether they're intending to or not, are picking up on little cues like that. And they're making a decision the whole time you're talking to them on whether or not they're going to hire you. One thing to remember, to put it into perspective, even if you have the greatest branding or whatever it may be, you are, for the most part, a stranger coming to their home, right? Why is then branding so much more important when you're going to a customer's home? How does that help ease the process? You want to present yourself in such a way that you look extremely professional and that you're an expert, because if you show up with a truck that has no logo, and you show up and you're not wearing a uniform of any kind, what does that tell the customer? What are they going to assume or think? They don't know you, right? We want to build that trust, because ultimately building trust is where you get the sale. You become someone that they feel like they can rely on. Now we get to terminal credibility. Terminal credibility is any credibility you gain or lose after the interaction is over. This is going to be your follow-ups, how you leave the conversation. Are you peeling out of the driveway when you leave? Little things like that. Are you going to take care of problems? So follow-up. You go and do the job and they tell you that some of their grass was burned. Do you ignore the email or do you go back and fix it for them? You know, one of the things I tell people in customer service world, there's some people who are like, oh man, I got, negative feedback. Someone said that we messed up. Every opportunity or every time that there is something where a mistake has occurred or the customer isn't happy is a chance for you to build your credibility, because how you respond to that sets you apart in their eyes. Has anyone here ever had a problem with a company and they were super quick to come back, they fixed it for you above and beyond your expectation, and you're still willing to use them or recommend them because of how they treated you in the event of a mistake? Same way for us. How you treat the customer when they're unhappy can sometimes even be more beneficial than having a perfect job, because they know you're willing to go above and beyond to take care of their needs. And what are they going to tell the next person who asks about that service? Yeah, man, they went above and beyond. They did everything that they said they would, and then when there was a mistake, they came back and fixed it. So, a few tips on just how to communicate clearly. Clear and concise. I mean, this is a no-brainer for most of us, but being clear and concise helps you set expectations both to your employees and to your customers. I know we're talking a lot about how we deal with customers, but being clear and concise with your employees helps to keep that expectation where it needs to be. It helps avoid misunderstandings later. We want to be professional. And what I mean by that is how we address people should be somewhat different than how we address family. Sometimes you get some people who their whole personality is all the same across the board, and that's great. But for other people, it's not so. So being aware of how you're communicating and what you're saying. Empathy. So the word empathy means being able essentially to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. Again, this is important when we're looking at how we're selling to customers because you're able to see from their point of view. If you have someone and you show up and it's obvious that they try and take really good care of their grounds and their house, and then they've got, you know, a really nasty looking roof or nasty looking siding, it's probably something important to them. It's an issue for them, and you're there to solve that problem. Avoid informality. Now this one, it depends on your rapport with your customer, right? Some people, we want to be just kind of really informal, really laid back, and that's fine, but you just want to be aware of it. Informality can include stuff like swearing in front of a customer generally is a bad idea, right? Even if you know them really well, it's just not as professional. So we want to find ways to align yourself with your customer, connect to your client, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But now, does anyone want to volunteer for a small thing? Just raise a hand, someone. All right, I want to pretend that I'm calling you as a customer, and I want you to answer the way you would answer. Ring, ring, ring. All right, hello. So, how should you answer a phone call if it's coming to your business? What's the... I'm calling you. So, when you get a phone call, and where I'm going with this, and I was putting you on the spot, but where I'm going with this is, when a customer is calling you, that's your first chance to be for your interaction with that customer, right? A lot of times I tell people how you answer, say your name. Hi, thank you for calling Agent Clean. I'm Nathan. How can I help you? People want to know what you're going to do for them. And it's funny how if you answer I know a lot of companies answer this way. Hi, this is Agent Clean. I'm Nathan with Agent Clean. And that's where you end it. By adding on that one line, for example, and from a communication standpoint, how can I help you? It automatically sets you up as someone who's there to solve their problems. And it's small, it's subtle, but it makes a difference. All right, if you've seen this exercise before, you're not allowed to answer, but if you haven't, I'd like you to pick a number, and then I want to call on someone who's picking a number. So pick a number in your head. All right, John, what number did you pick? 1. All right. How come you didn't pick 7?
Because it wasn't an option.
Because it wasn't an option. Anyone know where I'm going with this? So we're starting to move from communication into how we do sales, how we start to drive customers into a sales funnel and different methods on that. So what I just demonstrated is the idea that if you don't offer it to the customer, is the customer going to pick it? Most likely not. Now I'm not going to say 100% not, because every once in a while you have someone say, well, I really wanted this, I want you to do this, and they just know, right? But for the most part, if you don't offer it to them, they can't select it. So where we're going with this? I call this Starbucks concept of choice, and here's why. Starbucks originally only had 3 sizes: tall, grande, and venti. And what they discovered was they were selling a lot of grandes, but they really wanted to be selling ventis. So what did they do? Do you drop the price of the venti? Do you do discounts? No. They didn't change the price of anything. All they did was add a 4th size, the Trenta. And what happened? Magically, they started selling a ton of ventis. Why? This is a concept known as choice architecture. And if you're not doing this, I highly recommend adding it, because I think you'll see your upsales go way up. Choice architecture is a method of driving customers to the sales option that makes you the most money. In straight up terms, that's what it is. You're designing the choices that you're giving your customer to drive them to the one that you make the most on in terms of revenue, that's easiest to do in terms of work, and that benefits them as well. That's how we're selling it. One way to do this, as you see here, and you've seen it online, is highlighting the choice you want them to make. Hey, this one's the best, pick this one. Hey, pick the one in the middle, it's the best one. Does anyone here do price architecture already, choice architecture? Anyone offer multiple choices and drive them towards a certain choice? It's more than just offering the choices. You should, if you're doing it right, from a communication standpoint. Now we're talking about visual communication. Stuff like this, where you're accentuating the choice you want to make, makes a difference. Make it obvious. You know, show them what you want them to get. Another way to do choice architecture, and in fact I think you should always include this method, is what's known as price anchoring or price framing. Price anchoring is a method of using the price that you have for your products or your services in such a way that it takes advantage of people's natural decision-making processes. So humans naturally make certain decisions in certain ways. It's just how we are. We tend to be drawn toward the middle price, and here's why. First of all, humans from a heuristic standpoint are likely to make the same choice they've made in the past. Along with that, we tend to be rationally irrational. So here's what I mean by that. So first of all, through experience, we learn that if you buy the cheapest option, it tends to bite you in the butt. But we also don't feel like we need the top ends. We always tend to drive toward the middle. Now, in terms of rationally irrational, here's an example. John Doe goes to the store for an electric drill. He doesn't know anything about electric drills, but he needs one for a homemaking project he's doing. He gets there and they have two drills for sale, one for $15 and one for $39. Now, Joe, being someone who doesn't use a power drill on a regular basis, which one is he probably going to pick? The cheapest one, because why spend $40 when he only needs it for a short amount of time? He's not an expert or a professional, he's just using it for a quick job. Okay, so he buys the cheapest one. Now let's relate that. If you're only offering two options to your customer, a less expensive one and a more expensive one, which one are they more likely to choose? Just looking at those choices. Probably the cheaper option. But now, Joe goes to the store and he finds a $15 drill, a $39 drill, and a $79 drill. Now which one do you think Joe's going to pick? The $39 one starts to look like a better deal because what have we done? All we've done is add a third option that's a higher price. He knows he doesn't need that one. It's too high. But now that $15 one is starting to look a little cheap and you don't want to get ripped off and you don't want to have something that breaks halfway through the job. He's probably going to settle on that $39 one. What's funny though is if you had eliminated that third choice, he wouldn't have said he needed the $39 one, he would have bought the $15 one. When you are using price framing and price anchoring, you need to have at least 3 choices, if not 4. Because if you don't, you're no longer framing a price. The other thing to make sure you do when you are offering price anchoring, for example, here's an example of 2 prices. They called you for a house wash only. You bid the roof too because you're there and it's dirty, and you offer a combo. Depending on your customer, they're probably going to pick the house wash. That's all they needed. It doesn't make sense for them to do $2.99. Now some of them will, perhaps. But now what happens when you add a third option? We'll do everything, including the concrete and the windows, for $5.99. Well, they definitely know they don't need that, but hey, that middle option is starting to look better. For only $2.99, they can have the roof and the siding done, versus the cheapest option, which leaves the roof messy. Now, in our industry, it's a little bit different than buying a power drill, right? But that's where your sales presentation comes into hand. That's why you want to walk the customer through. You want to show them the benefits and drive them toward this middle option. When I build packages or show our franchisees how to build packages, I say, try and find the most time-efficient jobs that you make the most revenue on and put that in your prime package. And then make your full package a pretty high price. So if you land it, because we all have clients, right, that will just say, whatever it is, I'll do it. Right. You have it, you make that extra money. But if we're driving people to this middle option, we know we've got the most time-efficient jobs in that middle package, which means that we can do more jobs, we make more money. That's how that price anchoring works. So part of price anchoring and going and giving a presentation and being able to talk to the customer is we start to look at how to control the funnel, control the sales funnel by being in command of that conversation without the customer realizing it and without sounding pushy. We want to orchestrate that so that they're driven towards a certain choice. Yeah.
You've got 4 prices up there, but only 2 options. House wash or roof wash, house and roof, and full package.
You're talking about adding concrete and adding other stuff was what you were saying.
Right. Yeah. This was just an example. I didn't want to write a whole bunch of stuff. So, any other questions?
Okay, so say you do this on the estimate you're at the customer's house. Are you pricing everything out individually and then showing like a discount percentage, or are you just giving the price of what you want the package to be and not showing the savings by doing
So,
the bundle of
like, so itemized versus package deals is what you're saying. If you're going to be selling package work, I tend to not itemize it. Now, in this instance, I was showing you the way I tend to go off of it is I do a quick fix, a basic, and then a intermediate and like an advanced. And you call it different things, however you want, but then you get 4 options. The quick fix is just going to be a quote for what they called before. A basic is going to be like what they called you for in one quick and easy thing that you can add on that brings that price up. The middle pack is going to be what you actually want to sell. So it's going to be like if they called you for siding, you're adding on, say, the roof and concrete. And then the full package, of course, is going to be, let's clean everything for this amount. Is how I tend to space it out. So this next image isn't meant to insult anybody, so don't take it that way, but I am using it as an example of how I wouldn't necessarily offer choice to a customer. And I don't even know if you can see this very well. So this was discovered on the doorstep of a customer that we had gone to bid. And what it is a price sheet that has all their services listed out and a price, and it's circled whether or not it was what they asked for or it was something they asked for. Can anyone tell me one downside of using this method?
Ugly.
Okay,
It's a
ugly.
mess.
Yeah,
Too many numbers.
information.
So this being a competitor of ours when we went to bid, what's the problem with putting that out and just leaving it on a doorstep where your competitor finds it?
You can use it in every way.
You can make a presentation later with it.
I know how he's going to price the whole job.
Yeah.
That gives me a huge advantage over my competition, right? So there's one huge problem with doing this, and this is the same way with email, unfortunately, realistically, is when you write out your bid and then pass it on to the customer, you have no control over what that customer does with it. They could ignore you, which you won't even know if they're ignoring you, right, for a few days because maybe they're just thinking about it. They could just straight up say no. They could take it to a competitor. They might say yes. But again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's tough to describe our services the way we need to in written form, in such a way that you'd have someone actually read through all of it, right? So when we're controlling the funnel, we start to look at how are we doing this when we're talking to a customer. So here's an example, and it's just one example for you to think about. Okay, so I've made this sales presentation to this customer, and at the end, how many of you make the sales presentation and then kind of just drop it? You leave it and there's no call to action. Anyone? So we ask for the sale, right? When you get it done with your presentation, can we go ahead and sign you up for the service? Would you like us to go ahead and get started on the work? Would you like us to go ahead and put you on the calendar? Now, one of the things is we're using an open-ended question because they could still say no, right? Now, this is where, again, credibility comes back into play. If you have set yourself up as an expert and your credibility is really high with your branding and you come in and you give a killer sales presentation, your credibility has gone up, and now you say, can we go ahead and schedule you? If they believe you're the expert and you've done a great job of maintaining your credibility, they're probably going to say, yeah, I'd like to get on the calendar, right? But just because they say no doesn't mean that's the end of that call. How would you set up a follow-up?
You schedule a follow-up.
Do I have a volunteer to come up and play role play with me? Anyone? All right. So I'm going to be the customer, and he's just laid out his presentation for me, okay? And so let's say I give you an excuse. I say, well, I really need to think about it. How would you set up a follow-up with me?
Our schedule's filling up quick, so if you want us, we can slide you in sometime this week. If you need some more time, maybe we can look at next week. Give them options, maybe Monday, Thursday, what day works for you.
Perfect. So what he did there is he set up a follow-up without giving the customer an open-ended question. An open-ended question, by the way, is a question that can end in a yes or a no. When you ask for a follow-up, thank you very much. When you ask for a follow-up by saying, is it all right if I call you back next week? What's the customer going to say most of the time? No, I'll get a hold of you when I'm ready for your services, right? We hate hearing that because what does that mean? You're probably not going to hear back from them. Or it'll be weeks later when you're busy and now you're trying to fit in someone that you gave a quote to, and your prices might have changed since then. There's the other deal, So we want to work on asking questions that drive toward an answer. So like he said, would a Monday or Tuesday work for you? What did he do? He gave them two choices without it being an open-ended question. Now they can still say, no, those days don't work for you, but such and such day would work. Okay, so we want to use what's called assumptive language. We assume that they're going to get a follow-up. We don't want to ask an open-ended question where they have a chance to say no. So sometimes that could be as simple as, okay, well, I'd like to give you a call back next week to touch base and just see where you're at. Most people, even if they feel like you're being pushy, won't be rude enough to say, no, don't do that. It's just we're starting to play on the natural courtesy of a customer. Now, some people may have customers that are just like, oh, hell no, I'll call you back whenever I want. But the way he did it, again, we're looking to ask questions that help us set up that follow-up without giving the customer an opportunity to actually tell us no. It gives you another chance. So again, we want to find the problem and offer the solution to your customer. That's ultimately what we're in. We're in a service business where we're looking to provide a solution to a problem the customer has. A lot of times when the customer calls us, it's because it's a reactive, right? Oh my gosh, I just walked outside and my house looks like shit. Can you please come and fix this for me because I'm trying to sell it next week, all right? So we're looking for ways to provide a service and a solution to the customer. Part of that is we want to be the solution and not the problem. That's part of why we want our sales call to go well. We want our services to go well. But the other thing we want to do is, what is the hard part of the sales call when you're done with all the work? So we've already done all the work, we walked through. What's that moment the customer doesn't like to do? Pay you. Unless you've maintained your credibility throughout the whole call and you've been professional and you set yourself up for the expert. You gave excellent customer service, you did the job exactly the way they expected, they're more likely to just pay you because you did everything that they expected. You set that expectation and you met it or exceeded it. You under-promised and over-delivered. What's the worst part you could do is over-promise and under-deliver. That hurts your reputation more than almost anything. So you keep your credibility high, you set yourself up as the expert, and you build trust with your customers. Trust, of course, is built on commitment, sincerity, reliability, integrity, and consistency. Part of how you develop that that terminal credibility is that you're consistent. If you have 3 people who are all friends, they all own houses, and you do a great job at the first one, a terrible job at the second one, the third person isn't going to know whether to trust you or call someone else, right? You know, again, just reiterating that we set ourselves up, it's a professional greeting. You set yourself up as a solution, connect with your customer. How do we connect to the customer? So we start to understand sales as a persuasion, because selling ultimately is persuasion. You're persuading your customer to come to your point of view, which is, hey, my services are best, use my services. Persuasion is easiest when you're building upon pre-existing beliefs or facts. Now, how that applies to us is that we start to look at, what does this customer believe? Do they know that high pressure can cause damage to siding? Do they know that mold gets slick when it's on concrete and it gets wet? Do they know anything about soft washing? So how do you start to build upon what they believe and maybe introduce something they don't even know about to set yourself up as the expert? You want to tailor your presentation to the context. Okay, so here's an example. You go to a house and they called you about washing the siding. You show up and the garden is immaculate. One of the first ways I connect to my customer is I say something like, what a beautiful home you have. Oh, wow, your garden looks incredible. If something looks really good, it means the customer cares about it, and they've either spent a lot of money with someone to have it look that way, or they did it themselves. Either way, you pointing it out and recognizing that starts again to help you connect to the customer. Now, when you're tailoring your presentation, if you show up and your clients are elderly, okay, they're, let's say, in their 80s, and you notice that their concrete is black with mold, how would you sell that job as an add-on? Safety, right? Because they're elderly, and you say, hey, I know you called us out for the siding, but I did notice that you have your concrete is moldy, and did you know that mold can get really slick? And for your safety, is that something you'd like us to go ahead and add on and take care of for you? Now, let's say you show up, their house is immaculate, or the garden is immaculate, their roof is dirty, that's what they called you for, and it's a young couple. They're obviously active lifestyle, probably middle income or higher. How would you sell that concrete? Appearance, curb appeal. Hey, by the way, I noticed your concrete is all black. Did you know that that's actually mold growing in your concrete? That's something we can go ahead and clean up while we're here. We'll offer it for this price since we're already going to be here. Tailor your presentation, and there's lots of ways to do this. I won't go through all the examples, but there's lots of ways to find a way to tailor your presentation to the customer that you're trying to reach. This is where we start to get into understanding what's known as the social identity theory. And what this theory states is that people align themselves with different groups of people, and their identity is defined by the groups of people that they relate to. So, for example, you go and you're giving a presentation and you walk in and you see he's got rifles hanging on the wall and trophies. Are you going to mention that maybe you're a hunter too? What you start to do is you start to look for ways to show them that you're in their social circle. People by their very nature, especially nowadays, tend to be very wary of other people, especially if they don't know where your personality is or what you believe. We tend to be pretty professional and laid off and offstandish, honestly. And you're just someone coming in to offer a service. But now I found out that Chet here is a fisher, and he goes to some of the same places I do, and maybe I caught a fish a little bit bigger than his, but hey, that's something we connect on. Now I'm starting to talk to someone in a more informal way. I'm starting to talk to someone as part of my social sphere. We start to align identities and look for ways to connect to the customer. So, any questions on any of this before I wrap up? I could talk all day about communication and psychology, but I don't want to A, bore you, or B, overwhelm you. So anyone already using a lot of these techniques, and now you've got the concepts to put to it. How do you find, are there any examples of how you find ways to connect to your customer?
A lot of times, you kind of talk about the gardens and things like that. Multiple occasions I find with animals, with dogs. I mean, people, if they have a dog, they love that dog. And if you act like you care about it, it builds a relationship very fast with it. If their dog doesn't trust you, they won't trust you. Exactly.
That's real.
Yeah.
You care. Like I sometimes see their dumpster or their garbage cans out in front. I pull them in for them. Caring. Just pretty much a lot.
So doing little things like you see their newspaper in the driveway, you pick it up, hand it to them, come up. Any little thing like that where you start to show that you care about their property the same way that they do.
We pay a lot of attention to time. If every person that wants our service, we make a personal call. Even if we think that it's not going to be, we know it's not going to be result in business, we're there, we give them the full show. They don't get the short version, because you never know that their uncle or their aunt has 400,000 square feet of papers to seal. The second thing that we always try to do is we will spend enough time there. We're not pressed between appointments, but we try to keep our schedule full. What we try to do is work at the pace at which they feel comfortable in proceeding, and spend plenty of time up front just trying to find that commonality between you and the customers. Time is really important. If you cut your time too short, you're cutting your own throat.
Well, he brought up a good point when we were talking about credibility as a whole, is that even if it doesn't result in a sale, if you're still maintaining your credibility, who are they going to think of?
Especially on talking about the credibility, and again, we sell on the phone, and probably you guys do too to a certain extent, is when you feel that, okay, this customer is not going with us, what do I do to leave an impression with them? And as a matter of fact, this just happened with someone that wanted a partial wash. We just don't do partial washes. And she said, well, we'll call around. So I said, well, yeah, go ahead and do that. But look, if you have any questions or concerns, whether you use our service or not, please feel free to call me. That makes a difference in people. That will turn someone that will not commit into someone that will. Some have even stopped after I gave them that sentence. They stopped. Well, yeah, we'll probably go with you. They just turn just like that. Or in a day or so, or later that day, they'll call you back, because that honesty of, well, you said whether we use your company or not. It's like, yeah, okay, that's great. Or I have another question. When you answer that question, well, we'll go ahead and sign with you. It's just something.
It's building that image of being the expert. They start to trust you.
Can I do one more? When a person says, I need to think about it, or I need to make my decision, I usually will ask, everyone has certain steps they go through in making a decision, and they vary between people. You have several steps that you have before you're going to be able to say yes or no. Would you mind telling me what those steps are and the time frame that it takes for you to cover those steps? And how can I help you get down that process where you can make a decision?
It's a very common sales technique of looking for the obstacles in the way of getting that sale and then helping them move through it. The other thing that I didn't mention earlier was what was your name again? Eddie. That he did was he created a sense of urgency. Hey, my calendar's filling up. Assumptive language, sense of urgency, looking to beat those obstacles in the way, start to help disarm your customer in terms of making them reach that conversion. Sorry, I think you were first back there. How to make people like you in 90 seconds or less is like a book. I think there was another back there. Yeah.
I was going to say, for those people who are doing the commercial work, you know, it's a pain in the neck when the manager calls and the board decides to go ahead with this, and you're booked out a few weeks or a couple of months with residential work requests to grow a business that size. I found even a year ago, I scheduled my big commercial work way in advance. I tell them, if you don't book between now and after March, you're waiting until July. Put me on the schedule, and I get my big base work down, and because the residential side is cash flow. You know, anyone can get land a big job, but you got to finance it, load it, and that's one thing we learned. I looked my couple of trucks are booked for commercial work, but it goes for residential and commercial side. You know, we can schedule those bigger jobs 6 months out. It might seem like a big sale, but just put pressure on you, say, listen, I'm going away on vacation, I want to be around for commercial work, I want to be here, make sure it goes okay. The manager will schedule that work for you. Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes if you make people feel like they're going to miss out on an opportunity, they'll look like, you know, oh, look at the last, what's your availability? You're like, I'm booked a month out, but I had a cancellation on Tuesday because of family's emergency. I actually have a day open 2 days from now. But if it's past that, it's going to be over a month.
Right.
And a lot of times people will be like, and then once you tell them that they could miss out on something, they're like, put me down.
It's that sense of urgency, exactly.
I'll try and make this quick. I know you're pressed on time, but learning different types of personality traits, negotiator, promoter, nurturer, things like that. A promoter coming up to a nurturer can really be a turnoff and hard to break that wall when you're all wound up, excited, or if you're going after an examiner and he wants all details and you're just talking about, you know, how great the job is going to look. He wants to know facts, he wants to know times, he wants to know prices, makeup, things like that. So knowing your customer's personality traits will really break the ice and get in there for the close.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about, and I know I touched on it briefly, but feedback, that's why feedback is so important. If you show up to give a sales presentation and that person is kind of hustling around, getting their stuff together, looking at their watch, are you going to take your time, or are you going to be a little bit quicker about it? And let them know that you see that they're in a hurry, right?
I'll actually go on, like if I'm getting a lead for a big job, and I speak to a potential client, pretty much for commercial jobs, I'll Google that person's name and see if I can find out a little information what they like, and just kind of already have an idea as to what their interests may be, whatever I can find. And I'll tell you, that really, really helps. So before I even go there to meet them, I already went on, look them up and information I can gather, have that in my pocket.
Right. Right. Get one more over here. Take one more question. I think we had one more over here. No?
I had something like, if you're doing an estimate for something for somebody and they tell you, or you feel like they're going to shop and talk to other people and pricing, sometimes it's good to tell them, hey, here's some things you should ask if you're going to shop somewhere else. And that gives you the opportunity to show them what your process is, or show them that I'm insured, or I'm licensed, or I have this training, and say, you should, if you're going to talk to somebody else, ask them, have you been trained? How long have you been doing this? What's your process? Are you insured? And sometimes they'll book right after that, because they get a sense that you're trying to help them get the best deal and to get the right service, and that you kind of probably are providing that.
Well, I'll piggyback on that too. I say a lot of times when people will have they don't like the overall price, but they've called us out for a roof and the house wash and everything else. Listen, I'm not surprised that you can get a cheaper price for a house wash. 100%. There's a lot of people out there that can do that. You don't want just anybody doing your roof. You need somebody who knows what they're doing.
I lead with, I tell people, I'm going to be the most expensive estimate you get. And I'll tell you that. And I'll tell you where you can go and get an $150 house wash all day long. We're more expensive because, and I'll list the reasons, and it works.
Yeah, build the value in your
Not
service
everybody,
as opposed
not
to.
everybody is looking for the lowest price, and honestly, those customers I want.
Well,
They're a headache.
qualifying that customer.
People that
are on there,
are-
and just letting them know that, oh wait, because you've listed all the reasons why, and you've given a good reason why to go with your customer, and you're still like, well, yeah, I'm gonna call around. Oh, I've already given you the reasons, or told you about our customer. Were you looking for the lowest price? Well, oh yeah. Oh, well, we're not that company.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not the highest, but we're not the lowest, but this is what we do for a living. We don't do this for beer and cigarette money. Okay?
It's their biggest prized possession, so that sells that way.
Exactly.
You spend $500 to $1,000 and $500 to $1,000 in repairs, you get that lowest price.
Yeah, tell them like, this is the most expensive thing that 99% of people will buy in their life. That's not the thing to look for the bargain price on. They want quality.
So I think we got to wrap up because we got to keep moving, unfortunately. So I'm just going to end on this. So this is what we covered: communication and feedback. It's the oil for the machine. Credibility is king. You sell more through price anchoring and choice architecture, control social interactions, and understanding social identity and persuasion. The last thing I want to talk about is part of what we're showing here, and part of, especially if you have employees who are going out and selling, the reason why we create systems and processes and procedures, and why we try and keep every sales call the same in terms of structure, is because if you have 3 different people who are selling for you, and they all do it a bit different, how do you diagnose why someone's not making a sale?
Plus you're inconsistent.
And inconsistent, exactly. So, my point with all that is that communication, credibility, branding, how you set up, how you do your sales call, how you set up, how you answer the phone, is everyone answering the phone the same way, is all part of building that whole structure that makes up your business machine. And the more systemized you can have it, the more consistent you are, the more professional you are, the more that you'll not only be able to get those sales, but you'll also be able to diagnose when something goes wrong. So that's it for me. If you have any questions, let me know.